Dave's 5 Hot Takes. Yeah! Baby, we're back. Welcome back to Dave's 5 Hot Takes. It's me, Dave. I'm glad you guys are back. I can tell from the looks here in the class that everybody's just, look at you guys, everybody's big old wide eyes and smiles. And I'm really glad to be back too. I'm excited about these takes today, these hot dishes, hot takes. We got some really fun ones. Of course, I'm biased, so I hope you guys agree. But without further ado, let's jump on into this thing. Whoosh. Hot take one. All right, we're jumping right in here with the Knacks, My Sharona is our hot take one, or the Knacks. Just depending on how you pronounce the band name. I actually know this song from the Reality Bites soundtrack. I don't know if you guys and gals remember that soundtrack. I never saw the movie. I still have it, but I loved that soundtrack. It had Lisa Loeb's Stay, which I think was kind of what was the, super hit on that album. But man, it had World Party was on there. So many good songs on that soundtrack. Crowded House. Anyway, I love this song. It came on the radio the other day, and it was like one of those, what happens a lot on this podcast, where I was kind of listening to it now as a, professional, quote unquote, singer-songwriter, and really was listening to like all the quirks of that song. So here's some fun facts about that song. It came out in 1979. It was Capitol Records' second fastest number one debut song, behind the Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand, or I should say it was the fastest gold status debut single since the Beatles' I Want to Hold Your Hand. And it came out. That one came out in 1964. This was 79, so it's 15 years later. It was a 6-week number one on the Billboard Hot 100. So it was a massive monster song. I read about it, and it was named after a real life girlfriend by one of the two guys that wrote it in the band, and they wrote it in like 15 minutes. And that feels like it's one of those songs that kind of makes sense because you hear it and it feels like a song that was written in 15 minutes. Not in the construction is bad. That's not what I mean. But it's just so weird. You kind of feel like somebody wrote it quickly, because if they had sat long enough, they'd have been like, is this cool or not? Which I'm very glad they didn't, because it'd have been a tragedy if the world was without this song, because it's such a wonderful, weird little moment in rock pop history. But so here's the quirk I want to talk about. There's kind of a couple. One, just kind of the how cool and weird the chords are. So, it's in G. So it's doing G, which is the 1, 4 to flat 3, right? Which is not really anything new. It does that cool thing in the chorus when it goes, I'ma give it up, I'ma give it up to the touch of the other kind. My, woo. So it does, the chorus rather is 1, flat 3, 4 to flat 6. So it's really cool. It's a cool, weird, awesome chords. It just, you can feel feels like rock and roll. You're like, oh, this is weird, kind of pumping your fist. Then they do the bridge, and this is what really got my attention on this song. So I read a tweet. I was sort of looking around with the song and reading stuff about it, and this guy tweeted, like, don't you kind of feel like maybe the better song in My Sharona was the bridge? And I sort of laughed at it, because I don't think that's true, because I think it's just Teflon. This song is such a hit. It can withstand anything. But it does this weird thing where it kind of creates another song inside a song. So instead of doing like some solo, they don't do some weird solo over these weird chords. They instead do this. And they have this little instrument melody, and it's just this total departure. Like, it has nothing to do with that song. It's a key change in the whole thing. They get out of it by actually going to the 5 of the G, which is D, to go. So after... Which that's a cheat code for songwriters. If you just want to get back to the previous key, do the 5 of the previous key out of nowhere, and it gets you back to the key. It's like you don't have to work. It's just wonderful cheat code. It's like a song hack. But it's just so great because they create another hook that has nothing to do with the song inside of the song that's a bridge. And you see this sometimes. In fact, I was listening to Song Exploder on a run the other morning, and Dan Wilson was talking about in Closing Time how that bridge, he just wanted something that felt like a different total musical journey. And, at the risk of sounding a little check me out, or not check me out, but talking about myself, that's one of my favorite things to do in my songs. I have a song called Annie that I wrote with Gabe Dixon where we do this. And I just love creating a different moment, like a completely different moment in the song. It gets away from, it's an instrument moment, it's not sung, it's just like, let's sort of create a new landscape for 25 seconds before it returns to the other song. But what the Knack does here so effectively is it's not just another melody or moment, it's another hook. It's it's so hooky. You wonder if they had thought about it more, if they'd have gone, you know what, hey man, let's write another bridge around that song, because I think we got a great song there. But I remember somebody telling me in high school, right when I was starting to think about writing songs, they were like, don't keep best parts for other songs. Put them in the songs with the other songs, so you just have a bunch of best parts. Because I think there's always a temptation to be like, oh, what if we made this a song? And they were like, no, it just makes a song that much more bulletproof. It makes it that much more substantial by throwing in a super hook of a bridge that has nothing to do with the rest of the song. It's wonderful. And I think, it's that kind of like brazen attitude, I think that, and I love it when it gets celebrated in music, it becomes a hit, that people are like, yeah, we don't care that you change keys and turn literally into a different vibe. I've talked about this on Lionel Richie's Say You, Say Me, how bizarre that bridge is. And I maybe need to do a podcast on weird bridges, but this would be another one for me, because I think it's just such a weird look that really pays off. And obviously the sort of, population of the world went, yeah, we're good with that. Like, thumbs up. Hot take two. Okay, we're going to talk about, to me, a bass line in one of the best songs of all time. We're not going to do a deep dive on the song yet, maybe someday, but I want to talk about the synth bass line on Time After Time and how incredible that is. And we'll get to that in a second, but let me back up one step. This is a song by Cyndi Lauper. It was released in 1984. She wrote it with Rob Hyman, who was also in a band called the Hooters, who had hits on their own. Fun fact about the Hooters, which I love these kind of deep dives. It was founded by Rob and this guy, Eric Bazillion, who I think made $1 bazillion also in his career because he produced and co-wrote One of Us by Joan Osborne. And I think that album garnered $1 bazillion Grammys. So he lived up to his last name. I don't know if he changed his last name once he recorded those to just sort of live up to the hype. But so those two guys were in a band called the Hooters. Rob then went to go write Time After Time with Cyndi Lauper. And it was a huge hit. It was a hit for I think it was a number one for 2 or 3 weeks in 1984. But it's one of those songs that it's funny because now it's got a bazillion plays. There you go. So it's funny because it was only a hit for a couple of weeks, but it has to be one of the most played songs in the history of pop music. I mean, it's just everywhere. And especially another small asterisk, I love those moments in music where somebody from another band co-writes a song with somebody in another band for that other band, and then that song is a hit. In this case, Rob, who's in the Hooters, who writes with Cyndi Lauper and has a Cyndi Lauper hit. One, because yes, that's sort of what I do. I try to do in my career, so I think I have an extra heart for that because I just love seeing these moments where it wasn't a professional songwriter, quote unquote, that co-wrote Time After Time. It was a guy in another band who maybe Cyndi just loved the Hooters and was like, hey, I want to write with this guy Rob, or I don't know how they were set up, but I love that he had his own career as an artist and then sort of sidestepped into this other thing and wrote that song with her, and it was a huge hit. It is Time After Time is one of my favorite songs of all time. There's no doubt. I would also say, to me, in my gentle, humble opinion, it's like if I could put 10 or 20 songs in a time warp, or send it off into space in the event that aliens find it and go, what is this stuff that humans like? I really think it's that good of a song. I think it achieves everything it's trying to do, and I would say especially in the sentimentality. And how beautiful the sentiment is and how it just makes you feel it. I mean, those flange guitars or whatever's happened there, it's so cheesy, but gosh, it feels right in this song. And this is where I'm going with this, especially this bass part, this synth bass part. If you notice, so the song is, so the chorus is, or the pre is nice over, I left behind suitcase of memories, time after time. Yeah, that part. But then the chorus, lost in your look, that's me too, having to find me. Time after time. Right, it's such a great chorus. You're lost in your look, and you'll be waiting. One of the greatest vocalists of all time. Time after time. But if you notice what happens is that synth bass is loud as fire. And the bass does not come in until the choruses on the whole song. I think it may be around in the bridge, which is a rad guitar part. I should really do a whole take on this a whole podcast on this one song, maybe later. But that guitar part on the bridge is just bad to the bone. But they really want you to hear this bass, and that's the point I'm trying to make. If you think about, we think about the podcast where I've talked about You Give Love a Bad Name, Heaven is a Place on Earth, that era in the 80s where bass parts were almost as important as the choruses, they juice this bass part volume-wise, so you hear it, and it's that do 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 do. I'm butchering it, boom boom, but it's something like that. It's so loud, but what it does, and for those non-music people, it just makes the song move. It makes the song lift. It makes the song feel something, because most of the song is these, you're having movement, but there's no bass to support the movement. And then when the bass comes in, it doesn't just support the chords. It's not just going. It could do that. It says doom boo doo 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 doo. So it's almost a hook. In fact, most people without knowing it could probably sing that bass part because it's so pronounced. And I think that's such a genius move by the producers and the songwriters. I don't know who made that call, but that they go, we want this bass part to make the song move and add even more sentimentality, because you feel something, you feel the movement, your heart gets involved. And that movement, then it kind of disappears in the rest of the song, which when it comes in, again, it's that much more pronounced. And I love that. I love little moments in music where this happens, and especially on songs that are this good, that it does twice the damage, or the good damage, I guess, which is going to be the name of my next record. Hot Take 3. All right, Hot Take 3. This is a hot take I've wanted to do literally since the inception of this podcast. And I wanted to talk about this little anomaly or this quirk, right? So the band Sugar Ray, not Sugar Ray Leonard, the boxer, but Sugar Ray the band, which has, Mark McGrath, who's kind of become a sort of a pop culture guy, who I really like, actually. I think he's got a great sense of humor, and I think I'll tell you what, fun fact about Mark McGrath, if you ever see him on a celebrity quiz show that is music themed, nobody is going to get within a mile of how good he is going to do on that show. He is going to eat people alive on his sort of pop music knowledge. I remember seeing something when I was in college where he and Edwin McCain and somebody else were doing like a music celebrity Jeopardy. And it was a music-themed Jeopardy show. And he was, in fact, they asked Edwin McCain, said, Edwin, how do you feel like you're doing? He says, well, not really good when I'm sitting next to Mark McGrath, who has the GNP of Brazil as his earnings so far. I mean, the guy just eats people alive, which I love when musicians and singers and songwriters love music, because I feel that way. And so I feel a real simpatico with those kind of guys. And Mark McGrath seems to be one of those guys. I think he just really loves music. Here's the quirk about Sugar Ray, though. People, I don't know that people know this. So they had 2 records that came out. The first one, which was called Lemonade, I think, or something. Be careful of that cover, too. It's not for young eyes to see, which was basically heavy metal. Like, it was metal, rap metal, rock, which was kind of happening then. I don't think it did very well at all. And so, but again, you listen to that record, and there's maybe a song or 2 that might feel a little poppy, but most of it is just this kind of almost jokey heavy metal rap rock, okay? They put out their second album, which was called Floored, and it had Fly, right? With like another 1 or 2 songs that sort of felt like that, but Fly was an actual realization of like acoustic pop rock, sort of fun, poppy moment. The rest of the record, they have a couple that flirt with that, but the rest of that record, Floored, is pretty much the same, continuing on the theme of like heavy rap rock, right? Well, that album, just some fun facts. That song became the band's first hit, holding the #1 spot on the Billboard Hot 100 airplay chart for 4 consecutive weeks, and spent 8 weeks at the #1 spot on the modern rock charts. Floored, that album sold extremely well and was certified double platinum. The song Fly was included on VH1's countdown of the 100 greatest songs of the 90s at number 52. So out of all the songs in the 90s, it was number 52 of the best songs according to VH1. So this is what I think is so fascinating. So they're kind of this, you look at the band, especially those pictures, they look like rap rock, heavy metal 90s guys. They got dyed hair, tats everywhere. They're all like, shirts off and doing their thing. Well, then Fly hits, and you just see the band suddenly does this huge pivot. The next record that comes out is called 1459, like 14 minutes and 59 seconds. It's sort of a hat tip to the 15 minutes of fame. It has 2 or 3 hard rock songs. So they go from the 2 records before that were like primarily heavy metal, hard rock, rap. Now there's only a couple of those, and then the rest are like these pop acoustic songs. It yields 2 more hits with Someday and Every Morning. And then they cover Abracadabra by Steve Miller. If you're wondering how much the band shifts, they shift from like heavy hard rock, rap metal to covering Abracadabra. The next album after that, Sugar Ray, which was self-titled, had When It's Over in Hours, 2 more hits. So this is why I love this little moment, is that band went, okay, we have a super hit with Fly. And like, I just would have loved to sat in either the record exec meeting or the band meeting when there's like 5 of them kind of in chairs, sort of their arms crossed looking at each other. Like everybody's got new clothes on. They've got like, they drove up in their new Lamborghinis. Everybody's like, so let's just do a quick vote. Who wants to keep doing the heavy metal rap? Raise your hand. Okay, cool. That's okay. We have none. Okay, how many people want to keep doing these acoustic songs that I bet we write in our sleep? Okay, yeah, everybody. Okay, unanimous. Here, we're ditching the heavy metal rock rap. We'll do like 2 of those songs a record going forward. I remember laughing so hard when this was happening, because this was kind of when I was really beginning to listen to music. And I remember knowing them as like this heavy metal band, and then all of a sudden they have Fly and it's this hit, and they're like, yeah, no, we're not really doing that anymore because we want to send our kids to college and we love living in Malibu, on the cliffs overlooking the sea with this new money we're making. But it's also, and I don't mean to make light of it, because I think it's a brilliant moment too, because I'm going to tell you what's hard as an artist is when you've identified yourself with a genre like I think they probably had with heavy metal, rap, rock, all that stuff, and then you have success and not feeling like you're selling out. Because I think a lot of people in that world that probably knew them were like, dude, whatever. But I think it's genius. And not only that, and maybe this is the most profound, thought of this whole thing, that they could actually do the other thing as well as they did. Because boy, were they good at that thing. And I'm going to tell you what, here's your hot take from inside the hot take. I think Fly is I think production-wise and writing-wise, it's one of the most well-executed pop songs of all time. What they do in the track and all the little samples and loops, it's just so good. And I think they really defined a moment and kind of started a thing to me which was that sound, that sort of like little instrument hook that's on acoustic or electric with a loop drum and these kind of like throwaway lyrics that are super sing-along. Mark's got a great voice, but it's not that great, so it's easy to sing along to. Really pronounced harmonies that are as much a hook as the main thing. And so it's not just that, but it's a little bit of that Phil Collins thing where who knew that Mark McGrath and these guys could write these just incredible pop acoustic little ditties, and then suddenly they do it to incredible effect. So a huge, hat tip to those guys, and a huge hat tip for continuing with it. Now, granted, I'm sure the checks were helping, but I love that, and I love that moment, and I salute Sugar Ray and Mark McGrath and the guys for going, you know what, this is what we are now, because I really like those songs, and I'm glad they did. Hot take 4. So I was listening to this great James Taylor interview the other day, and he told this really fascinating story that I kind of wanted to relay and talk about for a second, because I think it's a pretty powerful thought and just kind of a cool thought to think about within the music realm. So James is talking about getting signed at Apple Records. And so the story there is that the Beatles formed this label called Apple Records for about a year. It wasn't around for long, in the late 70s. James was in London living there. He knew Peter Asher, who worked with the Beatles and at Apple. Pete, who would later go on to produce his records and manage James, I believe. But this is before that. So Peter just calls James and says, hey, why don't you come down and play some songs for Apple and the Beatles and see if we can get you a record deal here. So this is the best part of the story, and hearing them talk about it is it Peter allegedly leans into the hall once James comes to his office and says, hey, are there any Beatles in the house? And literally George and Paul come in and listen to James play a couple songs. And they say, listen, we love this guy, Peter. If you want to produce him, sign him. So they sign him. Here's what's really fascinating about the story. One of the songs that he plays, if not the only song he plays, was Something in the Way She Moves, which is like, one of the greatest titles of all time, and 2, one of the greatest songs of all time. Now, you probably see where I'm going with this. George Harrison later goes on to write and record with the Beatles Something in the Way She Moves. And he has it, before his death, he attributed getting that song title from listening to James Taylor play a song of the same name. And James in his interview is like, yeah, I thought that was like the greatest compliment ever. Now, a very important asterisk is you can't sue for song title infringement, meaning like if I wrote a song called Blue-Haired Woman, and then, some guy wrote a song called Blue-Haired Woman, you don't see that. It's hard to do that. I think they have laws sort of protecting titles, because titles are just, so hard to come by, and they're just so everywhere. It's like you're gonna probably infringe on somebody's. Lord knows how many songs are called, All My Love, or I love you, or there's just it's too hard to do, so they can't really police that. So James couldn't have sued George for that, but not only could he not have sued, but he thought it was a compliment, which I thought was so cool, and he just kind of speaks to like, I just thought, man, if I have made a Beatle want to write a song and then write not just a song, but one of the greatest songs of all time, like bar none, you're talking about an incredible song. But I think what's fun to talk about with that, and just to tell you guys and gals, that is how music works. And I think that's one of the coolest things about music. And that's what I really took away from it, was this fun, fact of going, that's what we all do. I mean, Paul McCartney has this famous quote about how we're all basically borrowing ideas from each other. And if a Beatle says that, then we're all doing it. And I think that's okay. I mean, you don't want to steal someone's song or that's a whole other conversation. But I think this idea of like, it's just huge stew that we're all contributing to that's affecting each other. I mean, the amount of concerts I've gone to and heard a song and come home and wanted to write a song that was like that song, it's innumerable. It's too many to count. And I think that's a beautiful little moment where you see into how musicians' brains work. George wasn't trying to steal anything from James. He was just, he was inspired. And then James was honored that he was inspired. And those songs are unbelievably different except for the title. And I think that's a really cool moment, sort of a peek into that. A sidebar, which I think I'll tell this story quickly. James talks about how he lived next to the Lennons, John and Yoko, in New York, and how it's this crazy story. If you get a chance to hear him tell it, it's nuts. But he was sitting in the window when he heard 5 gunshots, and he was on the phone with Peter Asher, who I was just talking about's wife. And he says, "Oh my gosh, I just heard the cops shoot somebody," basically. And she's like, "Oh, that's terrible." And she later then called back like 30 minutes later and said, "No, you heard the 5 gunshots from John Lennon being killed," which I thought, man, isn't that crazy? And he talks about that for a minute, and just the sort of how he was, not even whatever that would be feet away, sitting in his window, and that he got a call from her, and she lived in LA, and was calling to say, no, it's already on the news. And he just hadn't seen the news that a block away he had heard what had happened there, which I thought was really bizarre and crazy. Hot take 5. This is one of my favorite hot takes. I'm just going to go ahead on record as saying that. I was listening to this great interview on Song Exploder, which for those music fans out there, it's such a fun podcast. It's like 20 to 25 minutes of artists talking about a song that they wrote and all the nuances and where they wrote it and how they wrote it. And they play little voice memos, the ideas and stuff. It's great. But Dan Wilson was on there, who is Semisonic's lead singer and now has written hits for Adele and the Dixie Chicks and everybody with a face. It feels like Dan is so insanely talented. But before he was writing songs for other people, he was writing songs for his band Semisonic. And the song that you would especially know from them, Closing Time, was a big hit for them. It was a #1 hit, I think, on the modern rock charts back in like 96 or 7. But I love what Dan, so they asked Dan about like Closing Time, what's it about? And he's like, well, first, the band wanted me to write a song about ending the set. So, it's closing time, let's go home. And he said, but I was in this phase where I really wanted everything to sort of mean more than one thing. So every line of that lyric, he said, I wanted to have like a double meaning. So he goes on to explain, you can see it's all over the internet, these stories about the song. It's really cool. But basically they were having their daughter, whose name is Coco, and he wanted to write a song about basically birth. So it's not just about closing time, last call for alcohol and all that stuff. Every song, if you go and read that story, it's actually, or the lyrics again, it's actually this wonderful story about being born, which sounds crazy right now. You're like, there's no way. But you go back and listen to it, and it's crazy how much Dan pulls off this sort of master stroke of making so much of the song actually applies to being born, like someone, being born into the world. And it just sort of reminded me, that's one of the things that's so fun about songs. I mean, there's, if you read about In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins, there's all these like, is it about someone drowning and he witnessed a murder and all this stuff? And I read Phil Collins' autobiography, which is incredible, by the way. And he just says, I have no clue what it's about still. I just kind of sang the songs in a row like that, and they came out that way, and so I kept them. But it's funny how songs do this. I looked this up and I thought these were fascinating, sort of like songs that aren't about what you think they are. Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart who actually Jim Steinman wrote. And Jim Steinman you would know because he did basically Meatloaf's Bat Outta Hell, that record, and I think Bat Outta Hell too. I think Jim actually wrote those songs by himself and produced those records by himself. And Bat Outta Hell is still like, it's sold like 50 million copies or something insane. So Jim probably owns an island somewhere off Bermuda where he lives by himself. But he wrote it for a vampire rock opera. So Total Eclipse of the Heart, he said if you read the lyrics again, you'll realize it's actually about a vampire and vampire love, which I was like, vampire love. Harder to Breathe by Maroon 5 is about pressure from labels for songs. So the label wanted more songs and felt like he was suffocating. Maybe one of the best double meaning songs of all time in that same vein is Sarah Bareilles' Love Song, which is written from her perspective. It's to the label. I'm not going to write you a love song because you ask for it because you need one, which is genius. And I think most people kind of picked up on that. And, as the song sort of reached cult status that it has now, but it's just cool. And I think as fans and those who just love listening to music, you never really know what a song is about. And hearing that interview with Closing Time by Dan Wilson, I was like, oh, that's really cool to hear that, and I've made the mistake with my music sometimes where people ask what something's about and I'm like, oh, I was kind of about this, or I don't know what it's about. And I found it's wise to be careful because sometimes the stories people make up in their heads about songs make the song something different to them. And the minute you kind of give up what you wrote it about or what those vague lyrics mean, it can sort of kill the meaning. And so it's a fun little game, but it's fun to sort of realize that some of these songs you love are actually about something else entirely, or are also about something else entirely, which is it's a really amazing thing to pull off as a songwriter. Before I go, a quick heads up, make sure you hit that subscribe or follow button if you want to continue the madness, and rate the podcast if you feel so inclined. And I'm actually a man of multi-talents, and yes, talents are in finger quotes, but I have figured out how to work social media, so you can find me there under @DaveBarnesMusic. Feel free to come enjoy the fun/weirdness/dog and pony show that is Mi Vida. Boy, I'm whipped. You guys tired too? Man, that took it out of me. That was a good time. And as always, I feel like we did learn a lot. But I'll tell you one thing we didn't learn, and that's that Faith Hill is also a Christian campground in West Virginia. All right. Thanks for hanging out, guys, and we'll see you next time on Dave's 5 Hot Takes. Yeah!